Welcome everyone to the 2022 Gunlogson presentation. My name is Hallie Pritchett. I'm the Interim Dean of NDSU Libraries. This session is being recorded and will be available in the NDSU repository. The GB Gunlogson Endowment supports scholarly work related to the publications and archives of the North Dakota Institute for Regional Studies, advances general university outreach through institute-related activities, and enhances NDSU's land-grant mission through institute projects that preserve the cultural heritage of North Dakota. The fund is jointly managed by the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences and NDSU Libraries. This year's presentation is entitled The Landscape Architecture of the 1921 Morrel and Nichols Plan for Future Development of Buildings and Grounds, an Historic American Landscape Survey for the North Dakota State University campus. It's presented by Anna Maria Visilia, Associate Professor, Department of Landscape Architecture, and Dominic Fisher, Associate Professor and Chair, Department of Landscape Architecture. And with that, I will turn it over to Anna Maria and Dominic.
Good afternoon, and thank you for attending our Gunlogson grant-supported presentation today. University campus landscapes are tangible cultural forms of universities. They are considered valuable cultural heritage landscapes that embody each university's philosophy, characteristics, aesthetic values, and educational mindset. In addition, they have a reputation for being laboratories of progressive ideas in plant botany and landscape studies. Also, they have won increasing attention from the public for their profound cultural connotations, functional effects, and aesthetic values over the years. There has been a tradition of university campuses to be designed in isolation from the city rather than engaging with its urban fabric.
The United States has a rich history of campus planning and design, and were almost fully developed in the 19th century and early 20th century, including the NDSU campus from 1890. These campus master plans typically follow certain formal typologies, such as the picturesque campus, the Beaux-Arts campus, or the quadrangle campus. The NDSU campus, as it currently stands, is a blend of the picturesque and the Beaux-Arts, with a dash or two of parking lots. Through our survey, we will discuss the historical significance of the NDSU campus and grounds by focusing on the early planning ideas of the region's most prolific landscape architects, mainly that of Morrel and Nichols, and we will also connect their work to what came before them and what came after.
So the aim of this study is twofold: to shed light and expand the discipline's understanding of the Morrel and Nichols oeuvre with an emphasis on the early years of their planning concepts, and to study the history and nature of campus, urban, rural development in North Dakota. We aim to answer a few valid questions, such as how visual pleasure and functionalism are addressed in the original landscape master plan by Morrel and Nichols, how the sculptured gates and features, long alleys surrounding roads, paths, campus walks, and plantings compose the landscape image of a composite formal and informal design. How is the campus establishing a connection to the urban planning of the city and open spaces enhancement? Does the landscape of the campus embrace native species and attention to local landscape and ecology? And lastly, can it be considered a valuable outdoor laboratory for botany and horticulture?
Most of these questions can be answered using the Historic American Landscape Survey, which is the format we've used to structure our study. This includes site history, existing conditions, analysis of the significance and evaluation of measured drawings. We relied heavily on the NDSU Institute for Regional Studies, along with examining aerial photographs, local newspapers, and drafting of many of the site plans, and the history and significance to the profession of the landscape architecture for North Dakota State University, and to the catalog of American universities' campus design nationwide. The discoveries we made in this study would not have been possible without the support of the Gunlogson grant and several graduate research assistants from the NDSU Master's Degree Program in Landscape Architecture. So we'll start with a few of the surprising good things. Our research results were not what we expected. They ran much deeper and more interesting than we initially thought. We thought the beginning of landscape architecture at NDSU, as we say it from our department, was in 1983 when Professor Dennis Colleton was recruited to start our landscape architecture degree program. But through historical research and discussions with our colleagues, such as the preeminent architectural historian, Professor Ron Ramsey, we learned of the significant work completed by landscape architects Morrel and Nichols. Then upon further investigation, we found that the Morrel Nichols Plan was not the first plan, but hinged on and deviated from an earlier 1890 plan by landscape gardener A.W. Spalding, with input from none other than one of NDSU's first 3 faculty members, C.B. Waldron, considered in charge of landscape architecture at the North Dakota Agricultural College in 1934, as stated by the Bismarck Tribune. This is all new knowledge for us and very exciting in tracing the history of our campus. The professional title and practice of landscape architecture precedes our college by about 30 years, or well, our college, are formerly the Agricultural College, now NDSU. For those of you not familiar with the origins of the profession, the term landscape architecture was first used in Central Park in New York City by designers Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux in 1858. When we first wrote this proposal, we knew that Morrel and Nichols had drawn some of the first plans, and we were almost entirely focused on what Morrel and Nichols had thought about their campus planning, because they had written about it, and we'll discuss that here in a minute. And the other thing was we couldn't read and didn't know who it was that had drawn this very first plan. And we didn't expect to unearth any evidence of the author. However, as we started doing other subsequent research for landscape architecture in North Dakota, and specifically at Island Park in Fargo, we found the full name and information of A.W. Spalding, who was uncovered by historic preservationist and NDSU architecture faculty member Heather Fisher, which gave us a name to look even further. And with that, we found A.W. Spalding, the landscape gardener, sometimes architect, sometimes engineer, sometimes landscape architect, who practiced extensively in the Pacific Northwest and was the author of this very first linear campus plan. Okay, so that's where we're going, but let's start from the beginning a bit. Because the history of landscape architecture at NDSU on the campus starts at the infancy of the campus itself. One of the first buildings constructed was Old Maid under the direction of the first president, Stockbridge. And in his first prospectus, he wrote, the campus has initiated a long-range plan for designing the campus as evidenced by his announcement for a prominent landscape gardener in the Northwest named Spalding, who was commissioned for the master plan of the campus that included the layout of roads, buildings, and grounds. This was in 1891. He wrote, the location of the different buildings eventually to be required with the growth and development of the institution has already been determined upon, and the entire domain surveyed by an expert landscape architect. And the laying out of the grounds in accordance with these plans, their ornamentation with drives, walks, trees, shrubs, garden, and expanse of water is already underway and will be pushed as rapidly toward completion as resources and requirements will justify. This framing is very much in keeping with the work of prominent landscape architects from New York to Minneapolis including HWS Cleveland, who designed the Minneapolis park system, the Grand Rounds, and several parks in and around North Dakota. To show where the campus started, although most of us are very familiar with it, we'll do a quick reverse chronology for context. So here's the core campus buildings as seen today. There were plans in 1948. 1921 was suggested that there was a significant restructuring of the campus to change the layout. In 1919, the campus was still following the original 1890 plan. In 1910, this was one of the first documented plans of where the buildings were, and then all the way back to 1890, the original drawing. So essentially, you can think of, the gate at University and 12th Avenue as being the original entry to the campus.
But how did these plans translate into experience? Next is a brief historical overview of how and why we have the campus we have today. So campus development evolved from 1891 to 1920. During this time, C.B. Waldron, NDSU's first professor of agriculture, horticulture, and landscape gardening, also drew up plans for the college grounds. At this same time, the motto of the Minneapolis Board of Park Commissioners, adopted in 1883, was health and beauty, when developing the ground round park system by H.W.S. Cleveland, a contemporary of Frederick Law Olmsted. Health referred to parks providing fresh air, and they would be the city's lungs, as Cleveland and later Loring often said, especially for the city's children. And beauty signified the board's commitment to creating beautiful places as a picturesque scene without flower beds and other ornamentation. As evidenced by early women's field hockey photos, however, the overall campus development in 1920 displayed a lack of order and coherence. Therefore, an eminent need arose to look for a master plan that would redesign the campus and guide its future growth. Such a plan would propose an arrangement of lawns, plantings, and walks that is very pleasing and appropriate to the surroundings and the present topography of the grounds, and the execution of the plan will not involve a very large expenditure. So the firm of Morrel and Nichols was selected for this work. Nichols, born in Springfield, Massachusetts on April 15, 1881, was the first graduate in landscape architecture from MIT. While working with Morrel, Nichols served as a consulting landscape architect for the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Highway Department, and the Minnesota State Parks Department until 1960. He designed the site plan for the Capitol Approach in St. Paul, 1944, the University of Minnesota's Northrop Mall, and numerous colleges in the area, including St. Catharines, St. Paul, and the University of Minnesota's Duluth campus. Morrel, he was born in France and migrated to New York around 1904, where he met Arthur Nichols, and they started their firm in 1909. Morrel and Nichols, they wrote a book in 1911 entitled Landscape Architecture. And in this book, they argue, quote, the need of a landscape architect to plan for the development of various kinds of institutions is seen today in many instances by the sad result, which has been the outcome of building from time to time without any given plan for the future growth. It has been the aim of landscape architects to study as far as possible the future requirements and ultimate growth of these institutions, and so to plan for their arrangement that as the time goes on and as the institutions grow, year by year, the plan for this arrangement can be followed, and thus by looking towards the ultimate scheme can procure a result which will always be harmonious, end of quote. So Morrel and Nichols firm offered a wide range of civic and institutional projects, such as plans for residential subdivisions, municipal parks, hospitals, country clubs, cemeteries, historic parks, state highways, and college campuses. Most of the firm's projects were situated in and around the state of Minneapolis, while some projects they were completed in other parts of the US and also in Canada. Morrel and Nichols' design style exhibited a blend of Nichols' East Coast background, Morrel's European training, and Minnesota's regional character. They advocate their admiration for, quote, the stately Italian villas surrounded with their forests or cypresses and with their arrangement of terraces, gardens, fountains, statues, pergolas, etc., as well as for suburban English cottages covered with vines and with their broad lawns, walks bordered with old-fashioned perennial flowers and shade trees, end of quote. They seem to base their design philosophy on the intersection of these two approaches. They state, quote, it is the aim of landscape architect to meet all problems of development of property, public or private, with the sole aim of planning for that development in such a way as to produce the results which will give the greatest enjoyment and answer all practical needs, end of quote.
One of the firm's most significant works is also in North Dakota at the state capitol grounds. Their master plan, first drawn in 1919, set the framework for all of the buildings at the state capitol grounds. And this is unique because the original Capitol building burned down, meaning that every building on the state capitol grounds happened after the master plan was completed. Although it was not followed verbatim, it set a strong precedent for landscape architects leading innovative design solutions for future development. It also sought to tie the Capitol grounds and the city together. Due to their education and background, Morrel Nichols design services were promoting a synergy between civil engineering and landscape architecture, while characterized by sensitive sighting, expansive views, artistic creativity, a naturalistic landscape style, with the use of regionally indigenous trees and shrubs and integration of aesthetic principles with functional, practical objectives aiming to produce a harmonious whole. Their work at the state capitol grounds was cited by the first edition of Landscape Architecture magazine, and their emphasis on a properly focalized scheme is on the integration of public buildings with parks and boulevards while exploiting the natural beauties of the site to provide valuable outdoor space for the communities. The development of a comprehensive integrated park boulevard system was pivotal to this end, an important route of modern day city and regional planning, first thought to humanize the 19th century Americans in cities. Boulevards role as an insulator, which divided the city into sections separated by each other by broad areas filled with trees, became the richest and most beautiful ornaments with easy access to all classes of citizens. In effect, the boulevard was seen as a kind of linear park, readily accessible and rendering the streets themselves attractive. This can be seen in maybe the largest shift in the NDSU campus planning framework from the original Southeast Gate to a more formal alignment with University Drive, just as they had done in the general plan for the Capitol grounds and historical park. They sought to do with the North Dakota Agricultural College. This hybrid of the picturesque and classical style of landscape architecture was seen in projects across the Dakotas and Minnesota. The most significant of those being the state capitol grounds, done in parallel with the North Dakota Agricultural College, plan for future development of buildings and grounds. When you think of it, the title description increases the scope and scale of the work, hinting at the themes of their unique approach in the first volume of the Landscape Architecture magazine, citing an unusual way which may well be stimulating in similar work in the future.
So from 1938 to 1946, University President Frank Eversole completely disregarded the Morrel and Nichols Plan when he approved locating a stadium in the middle of campus. Therefore, in 1947, Morrel and Nichols were asked to prepare another master plan for the campus. The new master plan, published in 1948 in Spectrum, retained most of the existing buildings and roadways of the 1921 plan, but still called for the removal of South Engineering and Festival Hall. In 1949, President Fred Hals revised the 1947 Morrel and Nichols Plan to include the retention of South Engineering. We found some very interesting correspondence between President Hals and Mr. Nichols that indicates Nichols strongly opposed the new layout of the buildings as implemented by President Hals, citing keen regret over his failure to have made clear the program of planning being recommended, with a resultant misunderstanding by your committee and the board. So despite this communication, a member of the Board of Education replied saying, on various occasions, board members have talked about the manner in which buildings are located on your campus, and personally, I plead guilty to the authorship of a facetious remark to the effect that your layout looks as if the buildings have been dropped more or less at random from a B-29.
In 1964, another master plan for the NDSU campus was commissioned. This plan, like many of the 1960s, defined zones of buildings with related academic disciplines and places new facilities accordingly. This single-use and decentralizing plan guided campus growth for some time, but is not in use today. Maybe the most significant open spaces are the Churchill Field and Mall, which were preserved according to the Morrel Nichols Plan, as shown in this 1971 aerial view of the mall from University Drive. In 1983 is when the first landscape architecture courses were first instructed by Professor Dennis Colleton. Many of you are probably familiar with the Babbling Brook area. This is a memorial located between South Engineering and Agriculture and Biosystems Engineering. It debuted in the spring of 2005 as a tribute to Professor Dennis Colleton, one of the founders of the landscape architecture program at NDSU, who passed away unexpectedly in 2003. The most recent campus landscape master plan was completed by Sasaki and JLG in 2008 and has been followed, we'll say, lightly. Today, the development of the NDSU campus is planned by two committees, the Physical Facilities Committee and the Campus Committee, with approval of their recommendations by the President.
In summary, we compare the original Morrel and Nichols intentions against the current experience of the NDSU campus. The sweeping pathway to Old Main, as envisioned by landscape architects Spalding and improved by Professor Waldron in 1809, is still experienced today. The effect of beauty on personal mental health and social and economic health was also considered an important benefit. The 1920s plan for the NDSU campus considers the context of the city of Fargo's street plan by addressing a busy corner and reorienting the center of campus to University Drive, the main north-south thoroughfare. The classical mall, with walks defined by alleys, boulevards, and drives, has been eroded by many of the existing buildings, still reference the spirit of this plan. However, the spirit of shaded streets with pleasant curves remains a significant design element of the campus. The landscape architecture history of the NDSU campus is evident in the spirit of the land-grant university, but largely unheralded. The campus plan does not specifically call out the types of native species, but rather knights the assemblage of buildings into a plan with classical proportions and picturesque spaces. Also, as Nichols often cites, emphasis is placed on the importance of native plant species and the education of visitors to the grounds, or as stated in Landscape Architecture magazine 1921, the setting forth of the resources of plant beauty of the state for the easier comprehension of the people.
Having Professor Waldron, a landscape architect in his own right, as one of the 3 founding professors appointed by the first President Stockbridge at the university, is significant and needs more exploration. This is probably our most exciting and newest discovery. And some of this we've been continuing to work on and have added to. But Professor Waldron taught classes on making landscape all across the state. And we've just uncovered some of the park plans that he's done in Wahpeton, as well as in Grand Forks, between 1890 and the 1920s. This is exciting news for our department, which thought, we didn't start until 1983. But here we have one of our founding professors as a champion of landscape architecture before it was recognized as a licensed profession. The campus itself had a goal as laid out by Morrel Nichols of specimens of every plant being labeled with, as they call, the present and also the Indian name, or we would say the genus and species. This has come to partial fruition recently, and the campus continues to be a living laboratory. As you can see, from the early botany classes to current day landscape architecture and horticulture students. In 1911, in their book, Morrel Nichols called for a commitment to creating beautiful places in which citizens could escape from the city. This is true for campuses around the country and for NDSU. Recent NDSU approaches include the redefinition of the campus as an eco-friendly environment by designing new buildings well integrated with green technologies and infrastructure to face challenges in the context of climate change. In 2011, NDSU started a walking trail showcasing NDSU's trees. A tour guide takes walkers past 66 trees on a 1.8-mile trail. There's a state symbol now in front of descriptions that indicate the tree is native to North Dakota. And we have maintained our Tree Campus USA status since 2011, tracing back and connecting, I would say, what's the opposite of rolling over in your grave? Being happy in your grave, to Waldron, Morrel Nichols, and all the landscape architects who came before us. And thank you. And we still have time for questions. Oh, and my clock says we landed at 12:30 exactly. So we should get bonus points.
And people can put their questions in the chat, or I think if you want to just ask a question, turn your mic on, you can do that as well. Well, I can start with one for actually both of you. What is your favorite building on campus?
I think I would say that my favorite building is Old Main. And every time that I have the opportunity to, because we are in downtown, every time I have the opportunity to visit the main campus, I pass by and I climb up the nice entrance stair, and I have this feeling of history. and it's very strong. Yeah, that's my favorite building, I think.
Hi, Dominic, Anna Maria, David.
Hello.
Terrific job. I really learned a lot. It was really spectacular. But my question is, in the research that you did, was there, I don't know, other than just maybe bad decisions, was there any thought process? Like, there was that sort of parade ground, really nice quad type space that really, went deeply into the campus, and of course it's gone. But was there anything that you discovered that led to that other than just bad decisions?
Yeah, part of it was in the argument of the president in the 1940s, because Morrel Nichols, they wanted, well, it was South Engineering was the building that was in contention. They wanted to remove it or replace it, so that basically that picturesque area by Old Main and Putnam could be continued. But the president said, no, we have to work around it, which is I should know the name on the street. I'm blanking in front of the library right now. I think if that was not there, I think we would still have the continuous idea of what they.
I believe it's
what they had.
Albrecht is what you're thinking. Albrecht.
Yeah. Well, Albrecht, and then as it branches off in front of the library.
Oh, I think that doesn't actually have a name.
Maybe.
Okay, well, good. That's good. And I would never come up with it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
What was the question?
Oh, I was wrong. Administration Avenue, someone has in there. There's also a couple questions in the chat for you.
Oh, that's going to be a tough one to remove then, huh? Here's one for you, Anna Maria.
Yeah, in regards to the question about if we have an assignment, we do. It's the second or the third time. The third time, I think, that I give an assignment in the third year LA students to rethink and reimagine the campus of the main campus of the NDSU department, the university, and they come up with really amazing solutions. And sometimes they are very innovative, and maybe they're out of the question because of the budget. But and some of them, they are more conservative. So we have a bunch of ideas of proposals to probably to hold a presentation, to share them with everybody, and maybe have a big discussion on the future of our campus.
A question from Michael Miller relating to the future of NDSU and landscape architecture. What is your vision to enhance the campus? I figured someone was going to ask this, and I was trying to think of a way to deflect it, but the new president's not on here, so we can have at it, I suppose. Ironically, the new Glen Hill building, which is beautiful and we love, is placed on the one green space that has always been left to be undeveloped. So we're gonna have to work around it. One suggestion I would have, and I will probably give this to the incoming president, is to actually assign a campus landscape architect. It's very common for land grant, well, a lot of universities, to have a full-time landscape architect guiding development on staff. And I think, knowing that one of our first faculty members in the 1890s had that level of expertise, maybe we could continue to do it. Although maybe the smallest one to me is that Administration Avenue, which I think kind of decouples the north and south pieces of green space there.
Two things, Dominic. One is I was going to ask Haley for the video of this and send it to the new president.
Sure.
After what you just said, but I was having it before you said that.
Yep, yes,
but I think he would be certainly very interested in this as an idea. So I commend you on that. And I actually support the idea of a master planning group, certainly with a landscape architect and maybe an architect and other planners, but I completely agree with that. So, and so if you could send me the link when we're done, I'll send it to, or you can send it to President Cook, Haley, either one.
Oh, here's a question from local landscape architect Brian Leininger. What plan, if any, is currently being used as a framework to guide future development decisions? I believe it's the Sasaki and JLG plan, which is now 13 years old, so in need of updating. So I'll concur with Suzanne about hiring a campus landscape architect.
And I think that there are some thoughts currently under discussion, and because of the new plaza and the new science building that is almost completed, I think, about the parking lots, because it seems that we have too many parking lots scarce throughout the campus. And maybe those open spaces, they could be turned into parks and outdoor valuable spaces for everybody, not only the NDSU students, staff and faculty, but also the residents that they are close by. So I think there are lots of different sets of discussions at the moment.
And there was one suggestion about having students present at the MU gallery. We have had our students' work presented there, although not specifically about the NDSU campus. But I support the idea.
I have a question.
Yes.
So being a staff member at the library, a lot of feedback we get from students is that the library is really far away because many of the, freshmen and sophomores are in the dorms, which is up north. And so do you think that was considered? And, my response is always, well, it used to be very close to the main campus, of course, when it first was established, but I'm just kind of curious, like do you think that was considered a thought when the campus expanded, and what does that, how does that go into these types of conversations?
We can tell you why it is that way. And it has to do with the reorienting of where the kind of center of campus is. Because originally the campus more or less stretched from an arboretum to a park along 12th Avenue, from the railroad track on the west to the university on the east. It was very like an east-west thing. And then everything north of it was like test plots. But Morrel Nichols reoriented towards university, which meant that the western part was test plots and research, and then the residential and housing ended up going north-south. So I think the original intent was where the original library and the new library, our current library, would have been closer to the dormitories had they followed the original plan.
And I believe actually 10, 15 years ago or so, there was talk of creating a new library closer to the center of campus for that very reason. But that never came to fruition. And I think it got, I think the space that was allocated for it, something else was built on it, although I don't know what.
Yeah, one of my favorite things was just reading some of the correspondence between the landscape architects and the university presidents, saying things that I wouldn't likely say to a president, but they were very bold, and they would probably tell you, Lindsay, that had the president followed my plans, it would be a lot easier to walk to the library for the new residents.
That would have been nice. I am curious too, like with these campus plans being that they don't always know, I don't know how long I'm guessing they're supposed to be done way more often than they have been. So like, how do you account for new buildings that maybe came from a donor that weren't in the legislative plan or things like that?
That's a good question, and things move faster than ever. So we almost hesitate even when we're doing strategic plans for anything, anything beyond 5 years usually becomes almost obsolete. Usually, I mean, in planning, we're usually looking at, 10 to 25 years.
I'm curious, and I stepped out for a couple minutes, so you might have answered this already, but with the new Sugihara Hall and the removal of Dunbar, my understanding is there's going to be a green space there. Is there any involvement from the landscape architecture program or students in that, designing that, or is that done by a firm, or do you know anything about that?
That is designed by a landscape architectural firm. Actually, it is an NDSU alumni. I can't remember his name right now. The name of the firm, it's Galaxy, I think. I don't remember the name of our colleague, but he was in collaboration with an architectural firm of Zandberg in Fargo. And he was invited in the third year studio to give us a presentation on this new plaza. And it was a very exciting project. And we are all waiting to experience this new plaza and how it's going to connect with Albrecht Avenue that is turning into a pedestrian road at the moment. And the plan was that there is a greenway system that someone can really walk through some nice spaces and find oneself from the entrance to the Centennial Avenue.
Thank you.
I'm curious about like the structure, or like I don't know the materials that the building, there's a lot of like brick. Is that, obviously that's intentional. And I mean, do you see that staying the same? Do you see them adding? I mean, I'm sure there's obviously other elements that are accents and things like that. And if they are, I'm curious to know a little bit more about that too. But can you talk on that at all?
You mean bricks on the buildings or on the paving?
Yeah, the buildings.
I think brick was a very very common and very abundant material that they used at the beginning of 19th century. And it gave a very strong character because it kind of ties with locality and with the character of cities. So I think I like all those brick buildings a lot, and some of them they need to be preserved, and there is some work that needs to be done. But I find it beautiful and nice. I would like to see some new buildings, and definitely the new building that is now under its way. I think it's a very strong and very sustainable building that responds to today's needs. So I would like to see that blend between the old historic buildings that they need to be preserved and new buildings that they are introducing new technologies and contemporary approaches on how we live and how we feel about different technologies and how they can provide for more sustainable and environmental solutions.
Thanks.
And Anna Maria has degrees in architecture and landscape architecture, so she's the most qualified to answer those questions, and to defend them, against our architectural colleagues in the School of Design. I see one more question on the chat. How is the university done in terms of accessibility, and has the weather had an effect on design? In terms of accessibility, it's relative. I mean, very well if you consider what they used to be at Old Main or Putnam Hall. But yeah, weather has had an effect on the design. If you read through the last master plan in 2008, it seems almost overwhelmed by discussions of how students can walk to class with some protection from, vegetations or hedgerows or something. So it is, but the thing I always like to tell people is that some of the most walkable cities in the entire world are in very cold places. So it's not necessarily the cold that needs to change our design. And we're a hardy folk here, so we can walk outside. I mean, we don't like when it snows in April, but we'll still move around as we need to. It probably has more of an effect on maintenance, and maintenance usually gets a pretty strong voice in what gets designed on our facilities. Oh, Jenny, so about the development of the Babbling Brook space. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, just the, the kind of the time period. And I know, I probably don't know enough about the actual development of it. Other than that, it was designed by Dennis Colleton, former professor and director of the landscape architecture program, and then is now part of his memorial. Significant difference between original planning and today's master planning. I mean, the biggest one, which is the obvious one, is parking. After, the 50s, if it wasn't weather, people were discussing parking. I guess if you're talking about the approaches, oh man, I'm not sure. Our campuses have become much less park-like. I guess the new ones have. And I don't know if that just has to do with the way that we use our campuses and live. I mean, it probably follows along some of the changes of, how we design our dormitories. They don't look like the original ones either because of the preference of the students.
I know you guys talked about the plants. I just think our campus is so pretty, and I'm curious like what your thoughts are. Is there anything like the strengths and weaknesses of that scenery?
I think one issue that came out from the students that they have been doing some site analysis and observing how the users actually feel and experience the campus. And I think one of the main observations that came out was that they would like to find more athletic activities blended in a more nice way within the central campus area. It seems that all those sports and activities, they are kind of isolated to the north, and they are not very well integrated and connected. They would like to be in class and then be able to go to a basket field and play for an hour before they go to the next class. And that's something that they would consider as an enhancement.
Yeah, we're starting to see more integration of uses in campuses and less of them being decentralized or isolated as single uses. You asked about some of the plant material, and this would be a fun debate to have with my colleague, Dr. Westover, in the horticulture department, because we have these heritage elms and oaks that are amazing, but susceptible to disease. So some of them we can't actually select anymore. I have thoughts on, what we could for replacements. The early landscape architects, Morrel Nichols, they were really trying to think of, what reflects North Dakota and Minnesota. And the whole idea of the picturesque was that people could escape the city and go into a place that felt like nature, which means, not a lot of planting beds and decoration and other ornament. And I think that still holds fairly true for the southeast corner of campus. And that's probably exactly what you're speaking to, and the experience that you get when you get a walk through there to the library. Good
Yeah,
observation.
Yeah, definitely. It's always nice to see, especially they do such a good job in the summer. And of course, with this long winter, it's even less time we get to enjoy it, but
Mhm.
they do a good job keeping it up. And it's interesting to know that obviously there could be changes there. And so just kind of your feedback on that. Dominic, did you get to say what your favorite building was?
Oh, favorite building? Well, because I'm a landscape architect, I don't have to, but I think my favorite building is probably Putnam Hall or Old Main. The other thing that we found by looking at these plans is that when you walk through the gate between Old Main and Putnam, you're actually walking where the original wagon and a road was. So that was like the front steps that you would have only gone through early on in a car. But that was something that I did love about Morrel Nichols Plan, was it closed that off and put all the traffic up off of University. And I think, so I'm still answering the question. I would say Putnam Hall, because you get a walk there without cars and experience the front door of a building. So it's my favorite because the landscape is the best there.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Did we miss any?
Um,
I think there is a question about what our thoughts about on edible landscape.
yeah, so a question on edible landscapes and renovations of the 60s and 70s. You have an opinion on
I
edible
think there are
landscapes?
some quite large fields to the west that they could possibly become places to experiment and also provide edible landscapes. So I would consider that, not as part of the main campus with the parks and the boulevards and all the other open spaces, but I would consider a nice edible landscape to the west, where they have some very nice extended areas, and I think that would be a nice addition.
What's interesting is the original 1890 plan had a large arboretum on the west side of campus, and NDSU has an excellent research arboretum, but it's situated in Absaraka, so it's a 20-mile drive. And they are doing research in, not necessarily edible landscapes, but in some food production, mainly like I think wine and some cherries.
There is a university in China where they have turned the whole campus into a rice field, and they have the students actually go into harvesting during the season, and the whole landscape changes within the seasons, and the students are involved also in the maintenance and the cultivation of the landscape. So yeah, that could be another option. We'll go through all the questions.
I think we got everything in the chat.
So we are coming close to the end of the time. If there's one more question from anyone.
Okay, I thought I was asking too many questions, but if no one else has one, I am curious from the previous plans, if there's anything that sticks out that hasn't been implemented that you both would have liked to see implemented or could see implemented.
I sort of referenced the one I thought of before, which is, the removal or pedestrianizing of an administration avenue, which would kind of link up the Memorial Union area as its own spot, and then the rest of it could be connected. And that was actually a 1920s, generally a 1920s idea.
Yeah, and I think that I kind of touched on how I would like to see integrated some more sports facilities, loans, and sports activities blended within the current campus, like the images we saw at the beginning of the presentation, with the hockey fields and the tennis court that they had, and they were part of the active everyday experience on campus.
Thank you.
Okay, since we are pretty much at the end of time here, I just want to point out that my office overlooks both Old Main and Putnam, so yay.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for attending, and please join me in thanking Anna Maria Visilia and Dominic Fisher, both from the Department of Landscape Architecture, on their very, very fascinating look at the history of our landscape architecture NDSU campus. And again, the session is being recorded and will be available in the NDSU repository in probably the next few days.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you all. Bye.